PSI-FI Radio.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. This is Donna.
And this is Sharon.
And we are having, again, technical difficulties. At least I am. This has become, a twice-weekly thing, trying to get my switchboard and all the other nice stuff that Blog Talk has to offer. How are you tonight?
I'm doing pretty good, but I want to apologize in advance if anybody hears a cat that sounds like they are in agony. Is our deaf cat, Bella. Apparently she's in heat tonight, so you may hear her squawking on the air.
Yeah, I know that sound.
She gets a little crazy every now and then.
Every computer in my house today has done nothing but give me grief.
There's a reason for that, Donna. Apparently it's telling you that you need to not be on the computer today.
Well, that can't happen.
I know.
We have a really interesting guest for everybody tonight. His name is Zen Garcia, and he wrote a book called Lucifer, Father of Cain. And this book represents, I'm going to read from his bio, this book represents the author's belief some of the most carefully guarded and least understood secrets of biblical wisdom traditions. I've read the book. I'm fascinated by the book. And I think there's probably always going to be people out there that see the word Lucifer and immediately think, something different. But this book, it explores the Bible and explores a lot of things in the Bible, the hidden books, or not the hidden books, but the missing books of the Bible, just so much information, even about UFOs, reptilians, alien mythology that date back even farther than recorded history. And I know you, Sharon, are just as fascinated with it as I am.
Oh, yeah. I started reading it. I haven't completely finished it. I'm abiding by his quote to us in his introduction about taking our time and really absorbing all the information. I've been reading pages, and I go and I look things up in the Bible, and I look things up on the Internet, and I'm just in total awe, And when I finish this book, I'm sure I'm going to email him with 150 different questions because it's just I'm fascinated, and to me, it's something that if people actually sit and listen to what he's saying and comprehend and absorb what he's saying, it would make so much sense with good versus evil in this world.
It really would. It really would. And, it's like you said, when I read the book when I first got it, and then and you're right, you can't, I'm sorry, something just popped up on my screen that said my Internet Explorer has stopped working, so. But I started rereading it again the other day, just to prepare for the show, and I ended up with, I swear, probably a good inch thick of index cards with my notes on it. So I've cut those down to kind of fit in the 90-minute time frame, and I suppose we could stop chatting and bring Mr. Garcia on. And you're going to have to do that because we all know the thing about my switchboard.
Alrighty. Zen, are you there?
Yes, hello. I'm honored to be here. Thank you both, Donna and Jen, for allowing me to bring forward this information to your listening audience. It's a pleasure.
Oh, thank you. It's an amazing book. I was literally fascinated.
Well, I'm honored that you even took the time to go through it and to delve into the information. It is a lot of information, and I do, tell people to take your time with it because it took me 20 years of research in compiling it, and when I first began the research, I had no idea that this book would come out of all that. So.
Now,
Yeah, it was.
what inspired you to even write this book?
Well, I have always just been a studier of the word and of mythology, and in my past history, I have delved into a lot of the Sumerian teachings and the New Age teachings and all of that. But in the latter half of my spiritual journey, I started going into researching the Word, and when I began that journey, I was really a neophyte. I hadn't been through the whole acclimation of going to church every Sunday and being raised with all the stories and having knowledge of all the information. And so I really went into it with an innocent eye, and in reading it and putting together all of the extra biblical books and a lot of the books that we now have access to because of the internet with the Pseudepigrapha, the Nag Hammadi, the Colburn Bible, all these new wisdom texts and teachings, I found that there was an underlying premise that kept presenting itself to me, and that was that Lucifer was not the father of Cain. And that on itself really intrigued me, because that's not what mainstream churchianity or Christianity or even what the world or any of the, not many, there are a few pastors that actually are bringing forth this information, but there are not very many people that see it this way. And in unfolding and unveiling it this way, I was really able to unlock a lot of what I considered secret aspects of the Word. And so it really made sense to me, the things that Yahushua was saying in the New Testament that people could not understand, because the whole foundation for all of the teachings, both in the Old Testament, New Testament, and the extra biblical books, is based on the knowledge that Cain was not a child of Adam. And if you don't understand that, it's hard to piece together the entirety of the picture and see the underlying truth behind all things.
Yeah, it was amazing when I first read the book. I hadn't really thought about it. It was something that I hadn't heard myself, but reading it just seemed to make complete sense to me in so many ways. Things that I had never even thought of, and I don't want to say religious, because I'm not really into organized religion, but my faith is unwavering. So, and you do have to read it with an open mind, and I think, people with strong faith do have open minds, and I think maybe that's why I got so much from it. It made complete sense to me.
Well, I tried to write it in a form that would present it that way for people, and I took it all the way back to the beginning, because people don't understand the presence of evil in the world today and where it comes from and why it is so prevalent, why it is so domineering, and what the whole the New World Order, how that all ties into Cain and what happened into the garden, and even with the Tower of Babel, that was the first attempt at unifying the world in a world government. And all those things are tied together, and what we see being played out on the world stage before us as the Fig Tree generation, unless you have this knowledge, it doesn't make sense. But if you just open yourself to the possibility of the things that I'm presenting within this book, it can unify all those seemingly unconnected, esoteric aspects of life and living, and really turn a spiritual, it ties everything into a cohesive, spiritual, meaningful understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Well, could you explain
Go ahead, Sharon.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mommy. Can you explain to our guests, the basis of your book? Your basis is pretty much stating that Lucifer is the father of Cain. Can you explain to them how you came up with this idea?
Well, sure. Well, basically, I had just started reading all of these different scriptures, and like I said, it kept presenting itself to me everywhere. And so I began to study what are called the Targums. And the Targums are different language translations of the Hebrew Torah that was available right after the time, after Christ's death, and when the people were exiled to Babylon, when they were taken as captive and the temple was burned down. Well, when they were exiled up there and held captive, the Jewish people started to speak Aramaic more than they did Hebrew. So they created both the Palestinian and Arabic Targums, which just means translation. And so these three different translations were read every Sunday side by side to the people so that they could understand what was being discussed. And so in going back even further than the King James Version of the Bible or the Geneva version of the Bible, I found that the translations brought out completely different meanings than what was in the King James Version of the Bible, because most people believe that Adam fathered Cain based on King James Version Genesis chapter 4:1. But if you go back and you study both the Palestinian and the Aramaic Targums, it gives you a completely different translation. And so that set up the whole premise for my research. And then I started looking at different places, and I found a bunch of different stories that indeed confirmed this accounting. And then when I studied the New Testament and the words that the Lord himself had said, it also had fallen into the same thing. And then with the wheat and the tares, the parable of the garden, all those things tied in together. So the basic premise is this, is what happened in paradise on the sixth day when Adam was created, when Eve was split off from him and female and male came into different beings. Lucifer seduced Eve, impregnated her with Cain. The Lord Yahweh came into paradise, saw that she was already pregnant with Cain, told her that now because she had fornicated and eaten of this forbidden fruit, that she was now going to have to go through childbirth. And this is all Genesis chapter 3. He then told the serpent in Genesis chapter 3:15 that he would put enmity between her seed and thy seed, meaning that both of them were going to have children, and that there would be enmity between the bloodlines until the second world age, which is a 7,000 year of duality where we learn through the knowledge of good and evil through the entire spectrum of both pain and pleasure what it's like to have free will in flesh, and also to be in a world that is dominated by demons and devils, that is under the rule of Satan. And so for this 7,000 years, we would incarnate into the flesh, and all the angels would be born into the flesh and learn through duality and coming through life and the experience of life, whether we want to serve Satan or serve Yahweh. And the whole premise of salvation and judgment is based on the fact that this world of duality is a temporary one and will come to an end. In fact, with the parable of the fig tree, we are the last generation. But continuing with Genesis chapter 3, the Lord then turns to Adam and says that you are going to have to work the soil to bring forth sustenance in order to feed your children, because you are now about to have progeny. And so they were then, at that point, banished from what was the third heaven, where paradise is, and put on the earth with Lucifer and his fallen angels that had already been banished out of the upper heavens. And, we have all of these megalithic type structures and structures that were built even on, the moon or Mars or different places that we cannot explain how they came into being. And there seems to be earlier technologies and advanced civilizations that surpass even the technology that we have today as a modern society. The megalithic structures that were built even by the fallen angels and their giant children, which we know from Genesis 6 that when they interdicted themselves into the affairs of humanity and they left and abandoned their first estate, they came down and mated with the daughters of man and created a race of giants. This race of giants were the ones that became known as the men of renown, those that were the pantheon of the gods, the Greek gods and goddesses, the Romans, the many different cultures that all worshipped a pantheon of gods and goddesses. Well, these gods and goddesses began to eat the flesh of humanity and to drink the blood of humanity. And that was the whole premise for why the flood came into play and why Noah was spared and why his seed and his family repopulated the planet and began all that again. And those hybrid beings, the giants that were killed in the flood, they became disembodied souls, familiar spirits, and they are the ones that possess individuals today. There's a lot of the Satanists themselves, Luciferians, that mate with the fallen angels. They follow both the path of lycanthropy and vampirism, and all these different things are tied together and connected if you study them and trace them down.
That's fascinating. I mean, just even listening about it, I hope everybody gets a chance to read this book because it is amazing. You were talking earlier about the evil that's, I mean, just so prevalent in the world today, and it would make sense that there would be that quote-unquote evil bloodline. Is that what you see going on, or is it something?
Yeah. There's we've heard of Fritz Springmeier and the research that he's done on the 13 Illuminati bloodlines, and these particular bloodlines that are controlling the world, that are tied to the royal elite, that are everywhere, sovereign on all the kingships and queenships of the entire planet. And I had talked about how much power and how much control they truly, truly do have, and that we really don't realize how much influence they have over politics, international affairs, and really each one of our lives. And just to give you an example, Queen Elizabeth II, she owns 1/6 of the total landmass of the entire planet, excluding the oceans and Antarctica. And she owns enough land that it equals to the size of 3 times the United States of America. And just with her own, if she so chose to, she could end poverty herself by providing enough food and enough land for everybody and still have just massive abundance and massive wealth for herself. But these bloodlines truly are dedicated to evil, and they're dedicated to bringing in what we know as the New World Order.